This has been an interesting week in this region. The Houthis continue with their attacks. Just today, yesterday, and the day before, we had missile attacks by the Houthis launched at Israel. And at the same time, US President Donald Trump does something very unique in this region. And he speaks to the Iranians directly and he says, look, what you've been doing through the Houthi proxies is no longer proxy warfare. Everything they do and every bullet that they fire, we're coming after you, the Iranians. So to really understand that story and really understand the mechanics of who the Houthis are and why on earth a rebel group from Yemen that's 2,000 kilometers away is constantly firing rockets at Israel, we're talking to the expert on the topic. Her name is Inbal. I want to get the name of the organization right. Inbal Nissim-Louvton. She's from the Forum for Regional Thinking. Fascinating woman. We're about to understand how the Houthis work and how it all ties to Israel. So, Inbal, thank you for being with us. This morning, once again, the Houthis fired a rocket towards Israel, and I'd be interested to hear your take as an expert on Houthis and Yemen and everything that happens in that part of the world. How would you explain to my 11-year-old daughter why the Houthis are firing rockets at Israel? Because I've really run out of explanations to break it down for them.
When we were this morning today on our way to the local shelter, because we heard the alarm at around the sirens at around 7, then my almost 3-year-old son said the Houthis are coming for us. And then he laughed. So I'm not sure I have a good explanation and for your 11-year-old girl or my 3-year-old boy, but we have to see the greater picture. And by doing that, we actually have to go back into Yemen. I often say that if you want to understand the Houthis before Gaza and the war and before their alliance with Iran, you have to go back and bring the Houthis back home into Yemen. And so they start as a religious revival movement of Zaidi Islam, and also as a social movement in some ways. So part of their legitimacy to operate in the beginning comes from these terms. They want to save Zaidi religious practice and Zaidi community from local Salafi Sunni religious establishment that is in their areas, and they fear that they might steal some of the young generation into Sunni Islam. And then there's the whole dimension of periphery, of tribal groups, that they are not being allocated enough resources to their districts. And then it opens up to anti-American sentiments, anti-Israeli, anti-Zionist, pro-Palestinians. And so as they grow, they fight not only the central government in Yemen, in Sana'a, for many years, from 2004 to 2010. And then you have the protests of the Arab Spring. And soon enough, they take over the capital, Sana'a, in 2014. And I think that their alliance with Iran, as well as with the Palestinians, is ultimately serving internal and regional interests. So this is my take on it. The way they start and they operate, and then they see any alliance or any connection that might be helpful for them, they'll use it. I'm not saying there's not a genuine pro-Palestinian sentiment or religious sentiments in that sort, but it is definitely, I think, a tool for them, and they are gaining a lot of influence, a lot of power, legitimacy to operate inside Yemen in very, I would say, violent ways, and also in the region, as they show Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates their military capabilities, and they say, if necessary, we can operate that way against you as well.
Interesting. So I want to go back 2 more steps, and I think you hit on a very important topic. We sort of automatically move on with our life just with this understanding of, yes, Iran, and by extension, the Houthis and many other proxies, they spend, from my perspective, much of their growth, much of the future of their people on a goal that seems completely unrelated to who they are and what they do and the people that they lead. And you touched on this, on what Zaidi Islam is. I know very little about this. I think most people, if they know anything about Islam, they know that there's Shias and Sunnis and that they don't necessarily always agree with each other. And then some have maybe heard of the, Salafi movement within Islam. And so I've never, until we researched this topic, until the Houthis became an issue, never even heard about Zaidi Islam. Is there something within their faith system that is enough to make them, and I'm looking at the numbers, we've talked about this many times on, on this channel, they've taken their country backwards decades when it comes to economic growth and when it comes to financial success, when it comes to the quality of life of their people. They've brought, Yemen, it wasn't doing very well to begin with, but they've brought it back to a place where it seems like almost like an African country after a civil war, where there are no jobs, there is no aid, the economy collapsed. What is it fundamentally in the way they look at the world that triggers them to behave in this way?
So I think we should say that Yemen is the poorest country in the Middle East, even before the war. So when it has almost, I think, 3/4 of the population, which is approximately 35 million people, are under the age of 25. So they are young. Wow. And they are poor, and many of the young people are unemployed. So this is, to begin with, and they rely on supplies, on imported goods. Almost 90% of it, food and other supplies, even before the war. So this is the starting point. So obviously, with the civil war, it would deteriorate. I think that Zaidi Islam, and we also have to remember that the Houthis gave a very specific interpretation to Zaidi Islam, which is often considered very much closer to Sunni Islam rather than the Shia, the branch of Shia that we know from Iran, for that example, or from Lebanon with Hezbollah. So if we are looking or trying to say that there's a Shia alliance between Iran and the Houthis, or between Zaidi Islam and the Imamate, the different sect that we see in Iran, I'm not sure it's that natural. But the specific interpretation that the Houthis give to certain religious aspects of Zaidi Islam, which enables them to use force as well, I think they would take, for example, the idea of fighting unjust or corrupt regime. So this is something that they would imply inside Yemen against the late president and the president that is now the head of the international recognized government, mainly in the south, but also outside towards Saudi Arabia, towards the Emirates, towards Israel, in order to save the Palestinians. So I think this is one aspect, but they would take it from Zaidi Islam and enhance it or try to see it in a broader spectrum of Muslims wherever they are, that you have to help them. And also consider the fact that it gives them, it glorifies them, Egypt doesn't do much, Saudi Arabia doesn't do much bigger countries, Sunni countries that are supposed to be Palestinians, immediate brothers and saviors, are not doing so much. And then you see the small Houthis from the northern highlands of Sana'a, from the districts of Sada, raising the flag for Palestinians. And I think it gives them a lot of...
Can I pause you for a minute, Inbal? I'm losing you on the Palestinian side of things. And to me, as an Israeli who sits here, I often feel, and I'm sensing that I'm missing something in the way they talk about these topics internally. We have a lot of problems in the Middle East, and there are a lot of problems in the world. And I've done a lot of research in the past, just out of personal interest. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not the biggest, and it's not even in the top 10 biggest conflicts in the world, anytime, even now during the war. And yet, I look at it, countries, it's this rallying cry. Come, let's fight for the Palestinians. I perceive that, and I think many in Israel do, as hypocrisy. But maybe there's something, and I'm hearing something in the background of what you're explaining, that they look at it differently. That to them, the fact that people are dying in Africa or the Ukraine or in Sudan between Muslims and Christians that are fighting isn't an issue. and somehow the Palestinian issue is a much higher priority than others for some reason. Am I correct in saying that?
I think from what they say in general, they would criticize Western influence in many other places, and also they would say something about it in the case of Ukraine as well. So you would see probably some assistance, we think, from Russia or from China. You know, the way they see the foreign powers is that you would have the U.S. generally, specifically, and then the U.K. and anyone who is a part of the naval coalition that the Americans and the British formed last year. And so, of course, Israel, which is in their way some sort of extension of the United States, but they criticize other actors as well. But I think the Palestinian issue for them, there is a genuine sentiment towards it, as they feel like both people, the Zionis and the Palestinians, are oppressed, are ruled by Western or pro-Western powers. No one helps them, they have to help themselves. I think there's a genuine sentiment for the Palestinians in that way. Also, the religious dimension. You help Muslims before you help anyone else. But I wouldn't be surprised if they form alliances with other foreign actors, such as Russia, such as China, anyone else that would help them achieve their goals.
So I'm taking this one step further. When the Iranians say about the Houthis, they say that, look, these people aren't a proxy in the way you imagine them to be. They have an ideology of their own. They're not these puppets that we have an on and off switch with. They do their own thing. Are the Iranians being honest about that statement, and the Houthis actually genuinely care a lot more about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and let's call it Islam in this region, than we understand them to care?
I think this is a great question. And I tend to agree with the way of thinking that is saying, let's be careful with the way we are using the term proxy when it comes to the Houthis and the Iranians, especially if we compare it with the relationship they had and still have with Hezbollah in Lebanon, or with the Iraqi militias, or even with pro-Syrian groups, with pro-Iranian Syrian groups. This is a different type of relationship. And the Houthis, as you said, they are a local group. They are part of the Yemeni society. They started operating on their own mission with their own ideology. We do see similarities of interests, of ideology, of maybe strategic goals between them and the Iranians. The Houthis definitely see themselves as part of the axis of resistance, and as we can see now, probably the strongest one that is left standing. But I'm not sure it automatically says that they are an Iranian proxy. And I tend to believe, I can't believe I'm saying that, the Iranians, when they say that, it's not like Tehran would ask the Houthis to do something and immediately, it's not a command. It's not if tomorrow they say you have to stop doing what you're doing, then we're going to be done with the Houthi problem. So they operate at their own mission, their own interests, and if it aligns with Iranian interests, that's fine. We do have to say, though, that what we see now in terms of military capabilities of the Houthis is very much a result of the alliance with Iran. They've helped them in many ways, not only smuggling weapons, usually in parts by sea, and sometimes routes that go into the mainland of Yemen, intelligence, training, people that were sent from Lebanon and from Iran to help the Houthis for many years now. So this, I think, is pretty much agreed upon everyone. But the issue of proxy is a little more complicated. Some would say This is completely what Tehran says that the Houthis do. I'm not sure this is the case, and I think we see it lately, but it happened before during the almost a little bit more than a decade of civil war in Yemen.
So I think we have a bit of a problem because the U.S. right now, and I'm looking back several weeks, I'm looking at this article that we have here. President Trump has sort of been grouping together the Houthis and Iran. He went so far as to say to the Iranians, every bullet that the Houthis fire it's as if you fired a bullet. And then, Ali Khamenei, he responds and says that the U.S. will receive, and his exact words are, severe slaps. I love that quote. If they attack or respond with malice towards the U.S. So Trump is threatening that anything the Houthis do will be attributed to the Iranians. And the Iranians say in return, you might be surprised in what you get. One, because you're wrong in stating this. These people aren't exactly, they don't exactly do, as you say, everything that we tell them to do. And at the same time, they're going to see a lot more regional resistance than they want. And I'd be interested to hear your take. And this is something that we often talk about, which is people don't understand, they see the images of the Houthis and they think, oh, it's these guys in a dress and flip-flops. What could they possibly do? And maybe give us the picture of how significant where they sit geographically is and how powerful their interference in the region is. As in, when the Houthis say we want to disrupt, what does that look like and what are the implications for global trade and global stability? How powerful are they really are?
Okay, so I think we have two questions here. The first one regards the statement of President Trump and the answer he got from Tehran. Well, I may suggest a different reading or understanding to that. I think that Iran is very much responsible to what we see now, because we already said that the military power and capabilities that we see the Houthis have are very much a result of the Iranian alliance or Iranian help. So in that way, I would hold the Iranians responsible. And I think maybe President Trump maybe he meant to say it that way, that he holds them responsible in that way, that they've made the Houthis as strong as they are. Having said that, I'm not sure that if you say, again, that if you ask Iran to stop Houthi aggression towards the U.S. or the naval coalition or in the Red Sea or towards Israel, that it's going to stop. So I think, and I think we see that what Trump is doing and what the Americans are doing in Yemen is proof to the fact that they are not relying only on Tehran to stop Houthi aggression, but they understand that the Houthis are operating out of their own merits. So this is the way I see it, and this is my explanation. That's how I suggest, to look at it. And as for the other question, Yemen is at the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula, and they have a vast coastline, for the Red Sea, and also the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Now we have to understand that the Houthis do not control the territory that is the territory that is connecting the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, but the north part or most parts of the Al Hudaydah district. It doesn't mean that they cannot interfere with the safe traveling towards that route. And this is what they do. They decide who's going to who they will permit to go through the straits and who will not. And so we see Egypt suffering very much from that decision by the Houthis. I don't think the international community reacted fast enough or strong enough in that matter. Maybe we see economic forces much more adaptable to the new situation as they change the route. It makes everything much more expensive. Ultimately, we pay the prices, But I wouldn't say business as usual, at least not for Egypt or for Jordan, or for Israel for that matter. But it continues. It would seem like the economic catastrophe is not as bad as we might think, because we see that there is a solution and there is an alternative to that route.
I mean, you say that, but again, when you analyze Iranian and Houthi strategy, the numbers vary. I'm like looking it up as we're talking here. Let's say in the double digits, so minimum 10 and probably close to 30%. So a lot of the liquid oil and a lot of the dry goods that are globally traded goes through the Red Sea, then the Suez Canal. And so people said back in, well, again, the beginning of 2024, a lot of the ships sort of just diverted and they started going around Africa, and then some of them tried to go through the land route, let's call it across the desert, then through Jordan, etc. It jacked up the prices of a lot of the goods globally. It created a shortage. It's so scary that even whispers of or rumors of disruption of oil trade, they raise the cost of commodities when oil is traded in futures. And you look at that and you say, these people, and I think this is sort of an eye-opening moment when you understand the economics of it, these people who are a relatively small force, they have a disrupting power because of where they're located in the world to alter the economy of every country in the world almost at once. And especially when you think about who their neighbors up north are. You look at the Saudi economy and some of the sort of the oil sheikdoms in that region. If they send a couple drones, which they've done in the past, and they send a couple pirate vessels, and they just enough to scare away the ships, they don't even have to take over them, it's enough to overnight change the economy of this entire region. And in that sense, you look at them, they're, as you said, they really are a superpower in their disrupting ability. And the fact that they're ideologically driven and not just an on-off proxy where the Iranians can say, yes, today we want it and tomorrow we don't, it makes them even more dangerous because they're not predictable, because there's a more elastic relationship to them. And then I would ask the question of, so what do you do with that? Because aid has already been stopped to Yemen because they started killing some of the aid workers in the country. They've taken over the ports, so it's impossible to bring in goods without going through the Houthis and empowering them. And they're making very, very bold threats against America, against Israel, against the Saudis, against everyone who's part of that axis in the region. So my question is, when someone is so unpredictable and they don't care about the well-being of their people and they're willing to disrupt global trade, how do you possibly stop them?
I think it should be an international effort. The international community should ask itself, and it should have asked itself in November 2023, do we allow any organization, specifically a non-state terrorist group, that wakes up one morning and decides that it's going to do whatever it wants and allows some people to go through a certain path and others not, because this is what they've decided to do? And are we okay with it? Because if you look at the naval coalition that the United States and the British formed, you have other European partners in it, but it's not as wide, as unanimous, as powerful as one would expect. And I think this also plays into the hands of the Houthis. You don't see a very strong opposition to it. If you compare it to the way that the international community reacted years ago to the Somali pirates along the Somali coast, that was a different case, and they very much succeeded at that.
The Somalis didn't have ICBMs.
That's true. We are talking about different military capabilities, but it's going to be like that in a decade from now. It's going to be much harder to defeat any power like that. I think there should be a general decision. Do we as the international community allow non-state actors or states for that matter to decide what they do with strategic and economic routes along the Red Sea or any other way or any other place to decide, if they allow some people to go through it or not. The damage that the Houthis are causing Egypt, even if we don't talk about international
hugely substantial
commerce, it's huge. It's unimaginable. And also, we have to say the damage they do to the economy inside Yemen, either at the internationally recognized government in the south and in their own areas. And as you mentioned, international food aid and other aid workers are no longer operating, at least in Saada. Maybe in some other parts of Yemen, I would imagine that now in Saada, it's very difficult for them to operate, but it doesn't seem to have a very big effect on the Houthis. So I think that the reaction to it should have been much faster and much more severe and forceful in that way.
In what? In
the
military level?
Military, diplomatic. Yes, there should be a very broad coalition that would step up and say, we cannot allow something like that. And we would react with all the tools that we have, both diplomatic and military.
So there's this quote, I'm trying to think when this was, maybe 4 or 5 months ago. U.S. Central Command had a switch in their governing general, the leadership. And the outgoing general and the incoming general both said, we're essentially fighting in the Red Sea or the Arabian Sea, both of them, with our hands tied. And what they meant was, and there was this whole document it wasn't leaked, it was released intentionally to the press, which said, look, if you want to win against terrorists, you can't play defense. The only way, I think this is sort of in line with what you're describing, the only way to win against someone who is a terrorist whose goal is to destabilize is to attack them and use absolute force against all of their operations. And if all you're trying to do is stop their attacks, you're forever going to be playing a defensive game. Is that what you have in mind when you say they could have been stopped earlier?
I think that as soon as the naval coalition realized that what it was doing is reacting to Houthi aggression rather than trying to stop it or fight it, then that was, part of the problem. But I have to say that this is not something that you can solve only by military force. Ultimately, the war in Yemen, if we bring back again the Houthis into Yemen and the civil war, this is part of the war on the way Yemen would become. It's a war on the state of Yemen, Is it going, what kind of government it's going to have? Who is going to rule which territory? Because you have many powers and many actors in Yemen that are fighting to gain control over certain areas and resources. You have the Houthis, you have the government that they ousted in 2014, you have a separatist movement in the south that is comprised of many groups, and one of them we see that is very powerful now with the help of the United Arab Emirates. You have a separatist movement in the area of Hadramaut. You have tribal autonomous forces. You have many actors in Yemen. And ultimately, you will have to decide the way Yemen is going to look the day after, if we can try and imagine that. So even if you solve the Houthi problem in, even if you reduce their military capabilities, at the end of the day, you have to see either do we recognize them as a legitimate actor or power in Yemen, and do we give them the ability to control any territory and form some kind of government? Do we want to try to talk to another Zaidi, Shah Zaidi leadership or alternative to the Houthis and say, listen, some of your requests in the beginning were just. We want to be able to answer to them, and we are willing to give you some part, of Yemen in sort of like a federative plan for Yemen. But then you have to decide what you do. And I have to say that in that term, the negotiations that Saudi Arabia is holding with the Houthis ever since the middle of 2022, what it's doing in a way is normalizing the Houthis, because the Saudis wish to buy peace and quiet at the border and have the Houthis stop shooting missiles or aiming drones at them, and then they are willing to make many concessions over that time to the Houthis. If it has to do with goods that come into Yemen and they will not inspect them, if they renew flights from Sana'a International Airport to Jordan, for that matter. And this is how I think some of you had the Houthi operatives go to Syria or to Iraq or to other places, sometimes under student visas. So I think what the Saudis do, maybe without intention, is that they help normalize the Houthis. And then at the end of the day, when you go back and you want to find a sustainable solution for Yemen, you have to decide who's going to rule which part and who is considered legitimate and who is not.
But maybe the Saudis are the wise ones in this entire equation, because there's this mindset, I believe, in when people look at the world in a simplified sense, where they think that problems can be fully resolved. And especially in the Middle East, but I think anywhere in the world, without very, very dramatic changes that include the displacement of people completely, problems never really go away. You still continue to deal with the same ethnic tensions and religious tensions, and the geopolitics and the economics remain the same for the most part. They might change the name or the headline or the name of the leader, but the problem usually persists. So the Saudis look at this, I'm looking at what they're doing. They're playing both sides. They say, look, the US, hey guys, do whatever you can. We want a pact with you in this region where you commit to protect us against Iranian aggression against us through the Houthis, through the IRGC, through whoever it is. We want you to protect us, period, full stop. And we want you to guarantee a pact of mutual, let's call it protection, when it comes to Iranian nuclear capabilities. And at the same time, they look at it and they say, even if this all goes through on the best case scenario for the Saudis, for Israel, for the US, and the Iranians do agree to stop with their, let's call it, practice of proxy warfare, and they, for a season, commit to not destabilize this region. Even then, the Saudis still look at the Yemen and the Yemeni, like Houthi movement, and they say, look, these guys are unpredictable, as you say, and these guys are well equipped. These guys are willing to sacrifice almost everything to destroy what we care about, which is we care about our control, about our economics, about our oil. And if that's the case, we might as well negotiate with them, because they're not going anywhere. And maybe they're correct in the way they look at the world. And we're the ones who are sort of, living in a dream, expecting that a treaty, with a current president or current prime minister will actually change the history in this region.
I think what the Saudis did is that they started out war with Yemen. They entered the anti-Houthi coalition in March 2015. And then MBS thought somehow that it would be able to finish this in a few months. And when the Saudis went into the coalition, they said, we are here to eliminate the Iranian extension in the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula, and to help the central government, the elected central government, regain back its power. They have not been able to do any of these two things. And after many long years of devastating war, they realized that they have to use diplomatic tools. But I have to tell you, the pictures that we saw during 2022 of Houthi delegation shaking hands with senior Saudi statesmen is something that you can hardly believe or imagine. I would say that this is completely a Houthi win in that way, more than a Saudi realization. The Houthis brought the Saudis on their knees, the way I look at it. Now, I agree with you that it was much better for the Saudis at that point, and maybe earlier, to try and negotiate with the Houthis. but we can learn from all the many trials and peace negotiations throughout the last decade, that every time the Houthis took advantage of the peace process and the negotiations to regroup. And as they get stronger and the negotiations go to reaches dead end, they would start attacking again. So I think this brings us to a very to a difficult point of thinking on how we can solve that issue, even if we go to the negotiation table. And I think someone wrote a really interesting article, I think it was a year or two after the Stockholm Accord, which was a very important ceasefire and peace plan.
What is the Stockholm Accord? And when did that happen?
It's a piece. It was at the end of 2018 with the help of the international community. It was a conference that was held in Stockholm, and then they started a roadmap for the end to end the war. First ceasefire, and then all kinds of promises and concessions from both sides regarding Al Hudaydah, the ports, regarding Sana'a International Airport. You have some core issues in the negotiations that come up every time that the two parties sit down and talk with one another or through mediators. And so what he wrote, I think it was a year or 2 years after the Stockholm Accord, he said, I think the international community has what he referred to as the Stockholm syndrome, referring to the agreement. And he said, maybe we were so eager to please the Houthis and try to solve this problem in diplomatic ways that we did not notice, what was happening under our nose, that they didn't really want to solve that problem, but they were using that peaceful time in order to accumulate more power and regroup and then reopen war again. So this is why I say we have to try to find the right combination between the military response and the diplomatic effort. And I have to say we have to include in the diplomatic effort, which is something that the Saudis didn't do because they were hoping to buy their own peace and quiet. And I can understand that. Nonetheless, you have to bring all parties and all actors to the table if you want to find, hopefully, a sustainable solution for the Houthi problem and for the future of Yemen.
Can I challenge what you've been saying? I'm running in my head through a lot of this description you give. You raise some very fundamental thoughts. One of them is that what tends to happen in the Middle East is once an entity is destabilized, we end up negotiating with the terrorists. That happened with ISIS back in the day. Look at Syria as a prime example to that. The people that are sort of like the loved government of Syria right now were fighting alongside ISIS just a handful of years ago. And suddenly we've normalized these people. You look at the Houthis, they're a great example of that. Even the Iranian government itself, it is a terrorist organization in its nature. It is a fundamentalist, Islamic movement that hijacked a country. That's really what they are in their core. And you're saying this very statement I agree with. Like, look, you end up negotiating with these people, and at the same time, they've never gone back on what they said. I look at it differently. I'd always, as far as the terminology goes, the only ones who are honest in the Middle East when it comes to politics are the terrorists. They always tell the truth when it comes to their goals. The democracies, we always have to pick words and be, inclusive and kind in our statements and stuff like that. The Houthis have it on their flag. Their flag says, victory to Islam, death to America, death to Israel. It's a very clear message, and they've never taken it off the flag. And the same applies, by the way, to the Iranians. Same applies to Hamas. Same applies to Hezbollah. They were never unclear about their messaging. We just chose not to believe them, which is, in a way, it's a form of, I don't know if racism is the word. It's a form of looking down or belittling them and saying, oh, they don't know what they really want. If only they had McDonald's and trade and jeans, they might be happy. Only to realize time and time again that we don't understand them at all. They're very, very clear about what they want to achieve. And they're, to your point, I guess, They're a terrorist organization, zooming back into the Houthis, that have on their flag and on every statement that they make a clear statement of their goals and their intentions and their values. We want to destroy you. We want to destroy everything that you stand for and your way of life, and we're willing to stop at nothing to get there. And then the West and the Saudis, I guess, sort of as an ally of the West, look at that and say, well, let's try to negotiate with these people. There is no middle ground in this negotiation. They're saying we want to kill you and say, let's negotiate that. Like, how can you possibly negotiate? So I think the question really to be asked is how do you even go about engaging with these kind of organizations? Like, is normalization the right way to go about it? Or do you just say, look, you've stated your intent. You've made clear who you are. You've been honest and open, and thank you for that. Now let's respond accordingly. So what are your thoughts? You've studied this for years now. How do you engage with people who are so clear about what they intend to do and at the same time hold so much power over everyone in the neighborhood?
I think in some way we tend to go to diplomatic routes because the alternative is much worse. What is the alternative? To say, okay, so we'll fight you until the end of...
War is the alternative.
Exactly. No one wants to go on, for an unending war throughout his life. And I don't think any government wants to suggest that as a solution to its citizens. So I think we should.
Government. Inbal, that's the problem. No democratic government.
Right, but you know what? At the end of the day, I think in every part of the world, if you go to the people, we basically want similar things, and we have to find a common ground to work with that. The problem is, as you stated very well, is how do we deal with terrorist organizations when we want to apply diplomatic tools? And so the thing is, what may we offer them that would convince them to behave differently? So I think if there are things to offer, in the case of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, we pretty much know what we can offer, and then hope that it's going to be enough. But you would always have that military aspect to it, that you have to consider the other option, the alternative. And I agree with you. Maybe this is how Israeli governments dealt with Hamas for many years, and at least for some time, I thought this was a good way to deal with them. But as we saw on October 7, 2023, it was not a good idea. So, and this is why I say sometimes we help normalize those groups. But I think one option would be to try, as we work with them in military response, and also in a diplomatic route, to try and also look for alternative leadership to those groups. I don't think the Houthis are a monolithic group. From the very beginning of their operations, some said in 2004, look, violence is not the way to deal with the government. Let's try other ways. They also had at 2007, I think, or before that, they had a political party. And one of the main leaders of the Houthi family was even a minister in one of the governments. So I think you should try and reason with the more pragmatic parts of those factions, and also to see if there's an alternative. I'm sure not all Zaydis are pleased with the way the Houthis operate. Certainly not most Yemenis. But then you have to find the alternative. And I think part of the strength and the power that the Houthis gained inside Yemen is not due to the fact that they are very strong, or not only that, but because of the anti-Houthi coalition was and still is very much uncohesive and fragmented, and sometimes they fight one another. So this also plays into the hands of the Houthis. So at the end of the day, I think...
Inbal, I have to challenge what you're saying. you've studied this more than I have. I'm going to challenge you to think for a second. Think back 50, 60, 70 years in this region. Name a time where anyone successfully dealt, and I don't mean on like a 12-month period, I mean successfully dealt with radical movements with democratic tools, as in where a democracy, be it Western or local, dealt with a resistance movement or a revolutionary movement that was ideologically and religiously driven and did so successfully. And I'm going to challenge you to find that, because I don't think there is. This isn't an idea I came up with. I have a journalist friend who's spent a lot of time in Syria and Lebanon. The only thing I've thought, and I would love for you to prove me wrong on this, the only thing I found is only strongman dictatorships, sort of, the likes of Saddam Hussein, the likes of Gaddafi, the likes of, by the way, MBS and MBZ in their countries in a different way, only by people who are incredibly powerful and incredibly willing to use power and violence against, let's call it, destabilizing factions within their countries. Only then can a tribal society, especially when it comes to Sunni Islam, can it not sort of fall into what we're seeing today in the Middle East, which is time and time again, radical movements taking over territories, etc. Can you think of a time where someone successfully dealt with the likes of the Houthis, or the likes of ISIS, or the likes of anyone else, and didn't leave, a pile of burnt countries behind?
I'm not sure that our area is is special in that sort of way. You have radicalism throughout the world, and in here you have national aspirations combined with religious issues, combined with hatred towards the West and towards Israel, and many other things, and interests within those societies or governments, and power struggle between different groups. So I think the components are not unique in that way. But I have to say, at the end of the day, you cannot continue use force endlessly towards any. I mean, I agree with you that when you deal with a terrorist group that is attacking you, you have to respond back by force. But ultimately, this is a play. How long can it continue? You have to do something else if you want to make any other option or alternative grow in this on that soil. And so I think that part of the diplomatic effort should be not only dealing with this group, but try to find, for that matter, in Yemeni society or in Palestinian society and any other society, groups that you can help. First of all, that you can help them remove the terrorist organization from the head of the state. I don't think Iraqi people could get rid of Saddam by themselves. They needed help from someone. But what you need to do once you've eliminated him is to help local societies gain back their ability to create their own reality. It may not always work the way that you want to. What we see with Iraq now, I think, is a good example. But this is part of the evolving play of societies, and you can see that some parts in Iraq support Iranian influence, but others very much go against it. And this is something that you see, for example, in Iraqi society, but I think also in Yemen. You have enough groups that do not agree with the Houthis, that fight the Houthis, but as we saw, they are unable to get rid of the Houthis themselves. And I think that what the Saudis and Emiratis tried to do in the first years of the war was part of a very forceful reaction to the Houthis. And the U.S. and other European and UN and other organizations from the international community put a stop to some of the Saudi coalition operations, because they said, listen, you have a catastrophic humanitarian crisis in a minute if you don't stop now. And so they were fearing the humanitarian crisis. and they were just about it. So I think also another part that we have to put into the equation is to try and find better ways to help local societies while we are operating in military ways towards those terrorist organizations. And I don't think we found that way, because at the end of the day, the Houthis, as you said before, they received throughout the El Hudaydah ports many of the humanitarian aid and many of the supplies, and they do with it whatever they want.
I think that's a very good answer. There are no easy answers, and there are no quick fixes. So final thought and final question for today, zooming back to Iran. If tomorrow the Iranians reached an agreement with Israel, Saudi, the US, and others around the world, and in that agreement they committed to, and actually, let's say for the most part, hypothetically, they stopped supplying the Houthis with munitions and with training, manpower, finances, would the Houthi movement as a regional disrupting movement, would it sort of fizzle out and disappear, or would they not be substantially weakened by that?
I think if pressure would be applied both from the Iranians and Saudi Arabia and other forces with military action, I'm not sure it's going to be all peaceful, then there might be a change. But I have to say, if that kind of coalition is formed, I think Israel is going to find itself in a very fragile position. Yes. And I think this is what we saw during the attacks of Houthis on oil facilities in Saudi Arabia in 2019. I think the Saudis realized that the US reaction to it was not what they expected it to be. And in part, it contributed to the Saudis trying to reach an agreement with the Iranians with the help of China. So we have to be very, very careful. Although Israel would be very happy to get rid of the Houthi problem, the question is, what is the price that we are paying for that? And if we are going to be able to live with a Saudi-Iranian alliance for that matter.
We live in a complicated neighborhood. And I think in the end, I always like ending with this thought. As I think we always have to end with a thought about the life of the people. And that's always my hope. There are no quick fixes. There are no, regional, antibiotics that fix a problem overnight. It never happens that way. It's always a long process. But I think everyone who watches this, and I appreciate the insight and the time that you've given to this, let's call it this issue, these people. But it always boils down to the humans at the end of it. For the Yemeni people, what does the future look like? And what can be done to aid them in a way where their life doesn't look like it does today in 20 years, where their cities aren't lacking electricity and basic necessities, where women can actually go to school and marry outside of forced marriages and arranged marriages. Well, how do you reach a conclusion where life is better for them in the long term? And I think that needs to be the focus for everyone, because regional powers shift and they come and go, and governments come and go, and at the end it has to be focused on a process that betters the lives of people in this region. That has to be the focus for people who are looking to fix what's going on here, not just on the governmental level, but on the human level. Anyway, Inbal, I want to thank you for taking the time. It's been really interesting for me. I love discovering that I don't know much about a topic. It's always encouraging.
Thank you. I think what you've said is the most important. We always have to remember that the people who are suffering most from Houthi aggression are the Yemeni people. It may be hard for us to remember that during these days, but we have to remember that.
Perfect. Thank you, Inbal.
Thank you.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.